What happens when one of the most controversial figures in modern royalty sits down with one of daytime television's most outspoken hosts? The tension was palpable from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto the View set, and what started as a seemingly cordial interview quickly spiraled into one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history. Before we get into what actually went down, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on after hearing this whole story, because trust me, you're going to have opinions. The studio audience had no idea what they were about to witness. Meghan arrived wearing a cream-colored blazer, her signature polished smile in place as she greeted each host at the table. Joy Behar, sitting in her usual spot, extended a hand, but her expression was already guarded. Anyone who follows The View knows Joy doesn't hold back. And anyone who follows Meghan knows she's learned to fight her own battles. This was never going to be a fluffy promotional interview. The first few minutes seemed normal enough. Sunny Hostin asked about Meghan's latest philanthropic ventures, and she responded with practiced grace, discussing her work with women's organizations and her focus on maternal health. The audience applauded politely. Whoopi Goldberg nodded along, seemingly engaged. But Joy sat back in her chair, arms crossed, and you could see it in her eyes. She was waiting. Sarah N. transitioned to asking about life in California, about raising children away from the spotlight, and Meghan talked about morning routines and bedtime stories. She laughed at the right moments, seemed relaxed, spoke about the normalcy she'd found. But then Joy leaned forward, and the entire energy in the studio shifted. "Let's talk about the real stuff," Joy said, cutting through the pleasantries like a knife. "You've made a lot of claims over the years. Serious claims about your time in the royal family. But here's what I don't understand, and I think a lot of our viewers don't understand either. You married into arguably the most famous family in the world. You had to know what you were getting into. So why all the shock and surprise when it turned out to be exactly what everyone said it would be?" The audience went silent. Meghan's smile faltered for just a second before she composed herself. "Joy, I think that's a bit reductive of what I actually experienced. Is it though?" Joy pressed. "Because from where I'm sitting, and from where a lot of people are sitting, it looks like you wanted all the perks of being a princess without any of the actual responsibilities that come with it." Sunny tried to interject. "Joy, maybe we should let her respond fully before we—" "I am letting her respond," Joy said, not taking her eyes off Meghan. "I'm just asking the questions that people actually want answered, instead of lobbing falls." Meghan straightened in her chair. "I'm happy to answer tough questions, Joy. But what you're suggesting is that I somehow fabricated or exaggerated my experiences, and that's simply not true. When you're in an institution that refuses to protect you, that actively works against you, speaking out isn't about wanting attention. It's about survival. Survival." Joy's eyebrows shot up. "You live in a mansion in Montecito. You've signed deals worth millions of dollars. You're sitting here on national television. That's not what survival looks like to most people. Emotional survival, joy, mental health, those things matter just as much as physical safety, and the fact that you're dismissing that is exactly the problem." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Whoopi tried to redirect, suggesting they take a commercial break, but Joy waved her off. "I'm not dismissing anything," Joy continued. "What I'm saying is that you had a platform, you had resources, you had people around you. But instead of working within the system to change it, you walked away and then spent the next few years talking about how terrible it was. At what point does it become less about advocacy and more about publicity?" Meghan's jaw tightened. "You don't get to tell me what my intentions were. You weren't there. You didn't live through what I lived through. You're right, I wasn't there. But neither were the millions of people who you're asking to sympathize with you. All they see is someone who seemingly had everything and then complained about it." "That's incredibly unfair," Meghan shot back, her voice rising slightly. "You're reducing years of documented harassment, racism, and institutional cruelty to me just complaining. Do you know what it's like to have your every move scrutinized? To have lies printed about you daily? To be blamed for things completely out of your control?" Joy didn't miss a beat. "Actually, yes. I work in media. I've been doing this for decades. I've been criticized. I've been attacked. I've had people say horrible things about me. But I don't go on international television and act like I'm the only person who's ever had a hard time." "That's not what I'm doing," Meghan insisted. "Then what are you doing?" "Because from my perspective, and I think from a lot of people's perspectives, It seems like every interview, every statement, every appearance is about relitigating the same grievances. At some point, don't you just move on? The audience was completely captivated now, some nodding along with Joy, others shaking their heads in disagreement. Sarah looked uncomfortable. Sunny looked like she wanted to jump in, but wasn't sure how. And Whoopi was watching the exchange like a referee at a boxing match. Meghan took a breath, clearly trying to maintain her composure. Moving on doesn't mean staying silent about injustice. And it's interesting that you're telling me to move on when this show literally makes its living off of discussing and dissecting current events and controversies. Why is it okay for you to talk about things repeatedly, but not okay for me to discuss my own lived experiences? Because we're journalists, Joy replied. We're commentators. It's our job to analyze and discuss. You're a public figure who's constantly positioning yourself as a victim while simultaneously profiting off that narrative. There's a difference. So I'm not allowed to tell my own story. I'm not allowed to defend myself. I'm just supposed to take the abuse quietly and let people believe whatever lies they want about me. You're allowed to do whatever you want, Joy said, but don't expect everyone to just accept your version of events without question. You've changed your story multiple times. You've made claims that people close to the situation have disputed. You've painted yourself as this trapped, helpless person, but your actions don't match that narrative. Meghan's eyes flashed with something between anger and hurt. What actions are you referring to specifically, Joy? Because I'd love to know which parts of my trauma you think I'm performing. Oh, here we go with the trauma talk, Joy said, throwing her hands up. Look, I'm not saying you didn't have difficult experiences. I'm saying that the way you've handled those experiences, the way you've monetized them, the way you've used them as currency in Hollywood, it makes people question the authenticity of it all. Question my authenticity. Meghan's voice was sharp now. You want to talk about authenticity? Let's talk about how the British tabloids literally admitted in court to hacking phones, printing lies, and running coordinated smear campaigns. Let's talk about how my father sold stories to the press. Let's talk about how I received death threats, racist abuse, and had to have security because of the hatred that was directed at me. But sure, Joy, question whether that was real. Sunny finally managed to get a word in. I think what Joy might be trying to say, though perhaps not in the best way, is that some people struggle to reconcile the image of someone who was so unhappy in that situation, but also seemed to embrace certain aspects of royal life when it was convenient. Thank you. Sunny, yes, Joy nodded. That's exactly what I'm saying. Meghan turned to Sunny, her expression a mix of frustration and exhaustion. What you're describing is someone trying to survive in an impossible situation. Yes, I smiled at events. Yes, I wore the clothes and followed the protocols. What was I supposed to do? Have a breakdown in public? Refuse to participate and give them even more ammunition to use against me. I was trying to make it work, and when it became clear that it couldn't work, that staying would destroy me, I left. I don't understand why that's so difficult for people to grasp. Joy leaned back in her chair, studying Meghan carefully. You know what I think? I think you went in with certain expectations about what royal life would be, and when it didn't match up to the fairy tale you imagined, you couldn't handle it. And instead of taking any responsibility for your part in how things unfolded, you've made yourself out to be the victim of this massive conspiracy. A conspiracy. Meghan's laugh was bitter. Joy, there are literally court cases, investigations, settlements with tabloids who admitted wrongdoing. This isn't a conspiracy theory. These are documented facts. Fine, the tabloids were awful to you. The tabloids are awful to everyone. That's what tabloids do. But what about the stuff with your family? What about the rift with your father, with your sister, with the palace staff who said working with you was difficult? At what point do you look in the mirror and ask yourself if maybe, just maybe, you're the common denominator in all this drama? The audience gasped. Sarah's eyes went wide. Even Whoopi looked surprised at how direct Joy was being. Meghan's face had gone pale. You're actually sitting here on national television, suggesting that I'm responsible for my father selling stories about me to the press, that I'm responsible for staff members who leaked lies to journalists, that I'm responsible for an institution that has a documented history of protecting certain members while throwing others to the wolves. I'm saying that in every single conflict you've ever had, you're always the innocent party. Your father's the villain. Your sister's the villain. The royal family's the villain. The press is the villain. The British public is the villain. Everyone is always wrong, except you. Don't you find that a little convenient? What I find convenient, Meghan said, her voice dangerously quiet, is how comfortable you are psychoanalyzing me when you don't know me. You don't know what happened behind closed doors. You don't know the conversations I had, the compromises I tried to make, the ways I bent over backwards to try to make everyone happy while losing myself in the process. Joy leaned forward again. Then tell us, give us specifics. Instead of vague statements about how hard everything was, what exactly happened that was so terrible? What specific things did the royal family do that were so unforgivable? I've spoken about this extensively, Meghan replied. You've alluded to things. You've implied things. You've made suggestive comments. But you rarely give concrete examples, and when you do, they're things like not getting help when you asked for it, or someone making a comment you didn't like. These are things that millions of people deal with in their workplaces and families every single day, but they don't get to go on Oprah and complain about it. Meghan's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. Comparing my situation to a normal workplace is absurd, and you know it. This wasn't about office politics or a difficult boss. This was about a system that saw me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be protected. Protected from what, though? Joy pressed. From criticism. From scrutiny. You married into the royal family. That comes with scrutiny. That's the deal. They're public figures funded by taxpayers. Of course, people are going to have opinions. There's a difference between legitimate criticism and a coordinated campaign of harassment and racism. And again, I'm not dismissing the racism. That's real, that's wrong, that should be called out. But you've wrapped every single criticism of you in the racism blanket, and that's not fair either. Some people just don't like you, Meghan, and it has nothing to do with the color of your skin. Some people think you're calculating, that you're manipulative, that you're playing the victim, and you calling everyone who doesn't fall in line with your narrative a racist. That shuts down legitimate conversation. The audience was divided now. Some applauding Joy's points, others looking uncomfortable or upset. Meghan looked like she was fighting to keep her composure. I have never said that everyone who criticizes me is racist, Meghan said slowly. What I have said is that there was a racist element to much of the coverage and treatment I received, which is undeniable. And the fact that you're trying to separate my race from my experiences as if they exist in different universes shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how racism actually works. I understand how racism works, Joy said, her voice rising. I've been fighting against racism and bigotry my entire career. Don't lecture me about racism. What I'm saying is that you use it as a shield against any and all criticism, and that's intellectually dishonest. No, what's intellectually dishonest is you sitting here pretending that race wasn't a massive factor in how I was treated. You can acknowledge that racism existed in my situation while also having other opinions about me. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. But instead, you're doing exactly what so many people do, which is minimize the racism because it makes you uncomfortable to acknowledge its role. Joy's face was flushed now. Don't tell me what makes me uncomfortable. I've been having uncomfortable conversations about race and politics and social issues since before you were born. What makes me uncomfortable is watching someone with every privilege and advantage play the victim card constantly, while real people with real problems can't get anyone to listen to them. So my problems aren't real because I have money now. My pain doesn't count because I'm not living in poverty. That's your argument? My argument is that perspective matters. Context matters. And you seem to have lost all perspective about what actual hardship looks like. Meghan stood up abruptly, and for a moment, everyone thought she might walk off the set. But she didn't. She stood there, looking down at Joy, her chest rising and falling with barely controlled emotion. You want to know what actual hardship looks like, Joy? It's lying awake at night, wondering if the death threats against you and your children are credible. It's having panic attacks because you don't know who you can trust. It's watching lies about you being printed as fact and knowing that millions of people believe them. It's being told by an institution that they can't help you, won't help you, because helping you would be inconvenient for them. That's what my hardship looked like. And just because it doesn't fit your definition of suffering doesn't make it invalid. Joy stood up as well, matching Meghan's energy. And just because it was hard doesn't mean you handled it well. Just because you were treated unfairly in some ways doesn't absolve you of responsibility for your choices and actions." The two women stood facing each other across the table, the air between them crackling with tension. Whoopi finally stood up, placing herself slightly between them, her voice calm but firm. "Okay, ladies, I think we need to take a breath here." But neither Meghan nor Joy was backing down. Meghan's voice was steady but intense. "You keep talking about my choices and my actions like I had some master plan to blow up my life. Do you think I wanted any of this? Do you think I wanted to leave? Do you think I wanted to be estranged from my family? Do you think I wanted to be one of the most hated women in the world? I tried, Joy. I tried so hard to make it work, and it nearly broke me." Joy's expression softened slightly, but her tone remained challenging. "I believe that you tried. I believe that it was difficult. What I don't believe is that you're being completely honest about your role in how everything played out. Every story has multiple sides, and you've only ever told yours. And you've told it in a way that makes you look like a complete innocent who never made a single mistake or bad decision." "I've acknowledged mistakes," Meghan countered. "I've said in interviews that I was naive about what I was getting into, that I should have been more prepared, that there are things I would have done differently. But acknowledging mistakes doesn't mean I have to take responsibility for other people's cruelty." "No one's asking you to take responsibility for other people's cruelty," Joy said. "What I'm asking for is some accountability for the things you did control. Your decision to brief the press through your friends, your decision to sue newspapers while simultaneously cooperating with biographers, your decision to air private family conversations on international television, those were your choices, and they had consequences." Meghan's eyes narrowed. "I briefed the press through friends because the institution wouldn't correct lies about me. I sued newspapers because they broke the law. I cooperated with biographers because I wanted to have some control over my own narrative after years of having it written for me by people who didn't know me. And I talked about my experiences publicly because staying silent was killing me. Every single thing you just listed was a response to an impossible situation, not the cause of it." "But don't you see how each of those responses made things worse?" Joy argued. "You say the institution wouldn't protect you, so you went around them. That made them trust you less. You say the press was lying, so you engaged with them in ways that gave them more ammunition. You say you wanted privacy, but then you did tell-all interviews and documentaries. Your actions contradicted your stated goals." "Because I was trying to survive." Meghan's voice cracked slightly. "I was trying to find a way through an impossible maze where every path led to more pain. Yes, maybe some of my choices made things more complicated. Maybe if I had stayed completely silent and just endured everything, things would have been simpler. But simpler doesn't mean better, and staying silent was literally making me suicidal." The word hung in the air. Joy's expression shifted, something like regret flickering across her face before she composed herself. "I'm sorry you felt that way. I truly am. Mental health struggles are serious and real. But using that as the trump card to shut down any criticism of your behavior, that's not fair either." "I'm not using it as a trump card," Meghan said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm explaining to you the stakes of what was happening. You're sitting here talking about my choices like they were made in a vacuum, like I was just some calculating person playing chess with people's lives. I was drowning, Joy. And yes, maybe the way I tried to save myself wasn't perfect or strategic or politically smart, but I did what I had to do to survive." Joy sat back down, and after a moment, Meghan did too. The energy had shifted slightly. Less combative, but no less intense. "Look," Joy said, her tone marginally softer, "I'm not trying to invalidate your pain, but I think you need to understand why so many people are skeptical. It's not just about racism or misogyny or tabloid culture, though those things are all real. It's about the pattern of behavior. It's about how every relationship you've had seems to end badly. It's about how you've positioned yourself as this humanitarian and advocate, but your actions often seem more focused on your own brand than actual change." "That's not fair," Meghan protested. "I've worked with charities for years, long before I married into the royal family. I've advocated for women's rights, for mental health awareness, for racial justice. Just because those things also happen to align with my personal experiences doesn't make them less genuine. But it does make people question your motives," Joy replied. "When your advocacy always seems to circle back to your own story. When your charitable work always seems to come with photo opportunities and press releases. It makes people wonder if you actually care about the causes or if you're just using them to rehabilitate your image. Meghan's face flushed with anger again. So damned if I do, damned if I don't. If I stay quiet, I'm complicit. If I speak out, I'm attention-seeking. If I do charity work privately, no one knows about it and it doesn't inspire others. If I do it publicly, I'm accused of being performative. There's literally no way for me to win in your eyes or in the eyes of people who think like you. Maybe that's because you're playing the wrong game, Joy suggested. Maybe instead of trying to win over your critics or control your narrative or prove everyone wrong, you just live your life, do your work, raise your kids, support your causes, and stop caring so much about what everyone thinks. That's easy for you to say, Meghan shot back. You don't have people threatening your children. You don't have newspapers camped outside your house. You don't have your every move analyzed and criticized. You get to have opinions about everyone else, but no one's making a career out of tearing you apart. Actually, plenty of people have made careers out of criticizing me, Joy said dryly. I get hate mail. I get threatened. I have protesters outside the studio. But I don't go on other shows and complain about it because that's the nature of being in the public eye. You either accept it or you get out. I did get out, Meghan said pointedly. I left the royal family. I moved to another country. I stepped back from official duties. I got out, and people still won't leave me alone, because you won't let them, Joy argued. You keep doing interviews. You keep making statements. You keep inserting yourself into conversations. You can't have it both ways, Meghan. You can't demand privacy while also maintaining a public profile. You can't step back from royal duties but still trade on your royal title. You can't say you want a normal life but then sign deals to talk about how abnormal your life was, Sunny interjected carefully. I think maybe there's some truth to both perspectives here. Meghan, you've been through things that would break a lot of people, and you deserve compassion for that. But Joy's point about the contradictions in how you've approached things since leaving, that's also worth considering. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means the situation is complicated. Meghan turned to Sunny. I know it's complicated. I've never said it wasn't complicated. But what Joy is doing, what so many people do, is reducing that complexity to me being manipulative or calculating or dishonest. And that's what hurts. That's what makes all of this so exhausting. I can't even have a conversation about my experiences without someone questioning whether they were real or whether I'm exaggerating or whether I have ulterior motives. But can you understand why people question it? Joy pressed. Can you understand why, when your story keeps changing slightly, when details don't quite add up, when your version of events contradicts what other people say, why that makes people skeptical? My story hasn't changed, Meghan insisted. People take things out of context, or they focus on minor details and ignore the bigger picture, or they believe other people's lies over my truth. That doesn't mean I've been inconsistent. You told Oprah one thing about the wedding, but the official records showed something different. You've made claims about lack of support, but people who worked with you said you had access to resources. You've talked about being silenced, but you've had platform after platform to speak. These aren't minor details, Meghan. These are fundamental contradictions that make people question your credibility. Meghan's jaw was tight. The wedding thing was clarified. What I said and what people thought I said were different. The resources I'm talking about weren't just material resources. They were emotional support and institutional backing. And having a platform now doesn't erase the years when I wasn't allowed to speak for myself. But you've already decided I'm a liar, haven't you, Joy? You've already made up your mind, so nothing I say here is going to change that. I haven't decided you're a liar, Joy said. I've decided that your version of events is incomplete at best and self-serving at worst. There's a difference. Not to me there isn't, Meghan replied quietly. When you question someone's truth, when you pick apart their trauma, when you demand proof of their pain, you're essentially calling them a liar. You can dress it up in diplomatic language, but that's what you're doing. So there you have it. One of the most explosive interviews in daytime television history, ending with Meghan Markle walking off the View set after a brutal confrontation with Joy Behar. Make sure you subscribe.